Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the launch of our latest Footprint Intelligence report, Water Stewardship and Regeneration in the Drinks Industry. Where next? In association with Coca-Cola Europacific Partners. My name's Nick Hughes, Footprint Associate Editor and co-author of the report, along with my colleague David Burrows. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the report's designer, Trevor Marshall, and of course, Coca-Cola Europacific Partners for their support in making this research possible. I'll begin shortly by spending 15 to 20 minutes or so running through the report's key findings, after which we will drill down into some of the major themes with a panel of experts. At that point, you'll have the opportunity to ask any burning questions you may have via the Q&A function, which I will explain ahead of the panel session. And we'll try and tie things up around midday. The report itself will be dropping into subscribers' inboxes as a free download later this afternoon, and will also be available via the Footprint website. The timing of this piece of research is to my mind really quite apposite, coming as it does on the back of the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan, in the wake of Storm Bert this past week, and just a month on from the devastating floods that cost so many lives in the Valencia region of Spain. And you may say, well, hang on a minute, Nick, what's all that got to do with water stewardship and regeneration in the drinks industry? And the answer, of course, is everything. Water is the primary channel through which most of us will experience climate change, both directly through extreme weather events like floods and droughts that cause such harm and distress to communities, and indirectly through the impact of these events on the production and supply of key commodities like food and drink. Let me give you an indirect example that links directly back to the drinks sector. A less reported impact of those Valencia floods is that thousands of hectares of farmland suffered catastrophic losses, with citrus crops like mandarins, clementines, and oranges especially hard hit. Now, if like me, you always have a bottle of orange juice sitting in the fridge, then you'll ultimately experience the impact of those kind of flood-related losses through higher prices on the shelf or on the menu. So we can't separate water from the wider carbon net zero agenda and try to treat them as discrete sustainability issues. They're inextricably linked. And as we'll come on to discuss, the solutions are often linked as well. Yet, according to many experts, the national and global significance of healthy freshwater ecosystems is still largely neglected by governments, businesses, and yes, by us as citizens too. To many, water remains a cheap and plentiful resource that we can extract at will and consume readily and inefficiently with few repercussions. Going forward, that simply won't be the case. The good news, as we detail in our new report, is there are drinks businesses who are taking the issue of water extremely seriously, supporting water stewardship projects to improve the health of key watersheds, for example, committing to regenerative water use whereby clean water is returned to nature and communities, and investing in water efficiency measures in their sites and venues. And rightly so. Not only is water the main ingredient in many drinks products, it's also essential to agricultural production and manufacturing processes such as wet milling, mashing, filtering, bottling, pasteurization, and cleaning. Water is part of everything a drinks business does. So businesses not only have a social responsibility to preserve it, it's a commercial imperative that they can continue to access secure supplies long into the future. So I'm going to divide this presentation into three sections. I'll begin by talking a little about water risk and the key social and environmental issues linked to water extraction and use. I'll then move on to discuss the key industry initiatives aimed at tackling water-related issues and how drinks businesses are engaging with these. And I'll close by sharing some examples of how drinks businesses are working to reduce their water risk, use water more responsibly, and help build future resilience. So this past couple of years has provided no shortage of extreme weather, which in turn has given drinks businesses every reason to start taking water security more seriously. Global wine production, for example, reached a historic low in 2023, due in part to a severe drought in southern Europe. In England, conversely, we've experienced one of the wettest 18-month periods on record, which has impacted plantings and productivity of key crops used in brewing, such as barley and other key commodities. But these are global issues. The brewer Asahi warned last year that climate change has had a bigger impact on the price of barley than Russia's invasion of Ukraine, despite those two countries being among the world's largest barley producers. River quality is another key environmental issue associated with industrial use of water. Reliance on artificial inputs like nitrogen fertilizer to grow key crops can be a major cause of river pollution when it washes off of fields and into watercourses. It's important to stress too, I think, that as well as posing an environmental and commercial risk, management of water is increasingly a reputational risk for businesses amid growing awareness of how industrial processes and agriculture impact water availability and quality. Unlike greenhouse gas emissions, where 1 ton of carbon is essentially the same wherever it is generated, water is local, it's multidimensional, encompassing issues not only of quantity and quality, but also with access to water. Water is a resource that needs to be shared between local communities, the private sector, and nature itself. So this means that notions of fairness and equity also come to the fore when we're talking about water. And it means that collaboration between different interest groups is essential so that all of those reliant on water can access it equitably. This in turn makes it important that businesses are aware of their exposure to water risk, both within their ingredient supply chains and their direct operations, to help build understanding of how their use of water impacts potentially vulnerable local communities in water-stressed regions, so that they can tailor their response accordingly. Thankfully, there's no shortage of support available for businesses looking to get to grips with these issues. And to go through a few of them, the likes of the World Resources Institute and World Wildlife Fund have created tools to enable companies to undertake baseline water risk assessments and to zero in on specific risks within their operations and supply chains. Many large food and drink businesses are members of the Alliance for Water Stewardship, which has created a universal framework for the Quartile Commitment 2030 target that 50% of the, skipped ahead a bit there. The Alliance for Water Stewardship, which has created a universal framework for the sustainable use of water through the International Water Stewardship Standard, which has the aim of driving social, environmental and economic benefits at a catchment level. And as I teased just a moment ago, for us in the UK, the main forum for collaborative industry action is through WRAP's Water Roadmap, which is a key implementation framework for the Quartile Commitment 2030 target that 50% of the UK's fresh food is sourced from areas with sustainable water management. And businesses committing to the roadmap are required to measure water risk in their operations and supply chains, identify hotspots, set water-related targets and report on progress. They're also expected to invest in local collective action projects that deal directly with water-related issues in key sourcing areas for food and drink, both in the UK and overseas. So if we look at business engagement with that water roadmap, at the moment, 97 organisations have signed up, including 82 businesses. These include drink suppliers like CCEP, Britvic and Bellew. Most of the main grocery retailers are also signed up, as well as caterers, including the likes of Compass and Sodexo. And I think it's fair to say that there's been a sense up until this point that generating business engagement on water has been rather more challenging than for the two other Quartile 2030 strands relating to carbon and food waste. But that is starting to change amid growing customer interest investor interest, and also reporting requirements, which are evolving at a rapid pace, as well as, frankly, the realization among businesses of the risk of inaction. As Sophie Harrison from RAP told us, businesses are waking up to the fact that if we don't have a sustainable water supply, we don't have a product. Where businesses have engaged with water, for many, the focus has tended to be largely on operational usage that sits within a company's direct control, rather than the supply chain water needed to produce the food and drink sold to customers. But again, that is changing, and we are starting to see more evidence of work within supply chains to build resilience at a catchment level by, for example, implementing regenerative agriculture techniques, which help retain water on the land. And that work will very often focus on ingredients that are key to a particular business. So, for example, CCEP is working alongside the Rivers Trust and farmers in Norfolk, where a lot of its sugar beet is produced, to experiment with techniques such as cover cropping and wildflower planting, which not only help the soil retain more water, they can also reduce farmers' reliance on artificial inputs like nitrogen fertilizer, and hence have a positive impact on river pollution. Another example is Bellu, the mineral water and filtration brand, which is participating in the Holistic Water for Horticulture River Medway project in Kent. And the aim of that project is to develop measures for sustainable water management around the polytunnel systems that are often used for soft fruit production, which is a key part of Kent's rural economy. One really key point I want to make is that water experts we interviewed for this report were at pains to stress the importance of collaboration and collective action on water, in recognition that water is a shared resource and businesses will be sourcing ingredients from the same river catchments. Trying to engage on water stewardship on your own, it's not only incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult, but you also won't have the same level of impact as you would working as part of a collective. Now, that not only means collaboration between businesses, but also with other key local stakeholders like farmers and community groups, often facilitated by NGOs like the Rivers Trust and RAP. So, for example, collaborative work to restore freshwater environments and build resilience through nature-based solutions, like creating wetlands or planting trees, can help slow the flow of water and prevent flooding downstream, benefiting farmers, communities, and everyone else that relies on a healthy, predictable supply of water. And there are also significant co-benefits to investing in these kind of nature-based solutions. Tree planting and peatland restoration, for example, can have huge benefits in terms of flood risk reduction, but it can also, from a Scope 3 emissions perspective, support carbon removal and storage. And the creation of habitats that help clean and store water in the land and recharge aquifers can deliver biodiversity benefits too. The wetlands that has been created adjacent to the Cornish Orchards cider making facility in Dulo in Cornwall, which we profile in the report, also acts as a habitat for various species of wildlife, ranging from dragonflies to nesting ducks. Again, it comes back to this point that action on water can unlock a range of other environmental benefits. So although businesses are increasingly expected to take an end-to-end approach to water stewardship across their supply chains, investment in more efficient practices and behaviours, for example, both within factories and hospitality venues, still remains a critical part of an overarching water strategy. So what are the kind of direct operational initiatives businesses can take? Some of it boils down to simple behaviour change, turning off taps, identifying and fixing leaks quickly. In a hotel setting, it could mean using low-flow shower heads and toilet flow regulators. In a manufacturing context, it might mean investing in reusable cleaning systems so that the water used to rinse the chemical away is then used again to pre-soak the next clean. From a pollution perspective, there should be a focus on trying to release wastewater into sewers in a state as close to nature as possible by purifying it and removing any sediment and organic matter. And it's often possible to capture that organic matter and send it to an anaerobic digestion plant to be turned into biogas. Regardless of the specific intervention, a key principle is to closely monitor operational water use at the most granular level you can through extensive submetering, so you can really understand what part of the process is driving the water use, identify hotspots, and allow targeting of specific processes for water reduction. And finally, we're also seeing more businesses explore the potential of new technologies to make process improvements. CCEP's ventures arm, for example, has recently invested in a startup company called Pipeline Organics, which is using enzymatic fuel cells to leverage the glucose found in wastewater to generate renewable electricity. And that technology is due to be piloted early next year at one of CCEP's factories. There are numerous other examples within the report of how cutting-edge technologies are being used to help improve water efficiency and create co-benefits from its use and disposal. And we close the report with some key takeaways, which you can see in this slide. I draw your attention to that first point, which I think is particularly key. If you look at CDP data referenced in the report, it shows that not nearly enough businesses are ensuring that water-related risks and opportunities are systematically integrated into corporate governance and decision-making, from the boardroom and senior management right down through to employees working in factories and hospitality venues. This needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. So on that note of urgency, we shall move on to our panel session. Should you have any questions, please do feel free to enter them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our very best to get them answered in the time that we have. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel. Eleanor Pendle is Sustainability Research Lead at WaterScan. Emmeline Rogers is Head of Sustainability at Heineken UK. Julian Cailloet-Noble is Managing Director of the Sustainable Restaurant Association. And Sam Jones is Director of Sustainability and Policy for GB at Coca-Cola Europacific Partners. So welcome to you all. Sam, perhaps I can come to you first, if I may. Why is water such a vital resource to CCEP, and what's been the focus of your work around water stewardship and regeneration?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick, and thank you for the sort of very concise summary of the report just now. I mean, in a really obvious sense, I mean, what we sell is water. I mean, we have direct water products in our Smart Water brand, but all of our other sort of soft drinks and non-alcoholic ready-to-drink beverages, they're 99% water with, I'd sort of joke around and say that it's water with some bits of nature added to it, and essentially that's what it is. So it is our core ingredient of everything that we make, distribute, and sell. But it's also fundamental to those ingredients. So you mentioned citrus, you mentioned sugar. If you're in a food and drink business, you are dependent on water for all of the production and supply of your raw materials, give or take, and that includes packaging as well. So without water, we don't have a business either operationally or from a procurement and supply chain perspective. And in terms of our focus on water, we're doing a few things. I mean, you mentioned efficiency, and I think everything starts in any manufacturing organization with optimizing and being as efficient as you possibly can. So we have site level targets we talk about water usage ratios to reduce the water usage ratio as much as we possibly can. And that is within our manufacturing, how much water do we use to produce a beverage or a litre of soft drinks. But really that's the kind of bit of the iceberg that you see, if you like. Beneath that, there's a huge amount of work that goes on, and an increasing amount of work with our suppliers and our supply chain and into procurement. And really that focuses on a couple of things. One is driving standards into our supply base and encouraging them, educating them, equipping them to work on water reduction and water efficiency within their own operations. But also looking at we talk about a river basin approach. You mentioned, Nick, the kind of localness of water compared to carbon, which often feels like a kind of macro global issue. Water is both a global issue, but also a very, very local issue. And what we are increasingly trying to do is work through partners such as Thames 21 and the Rivers Trust and local branches of Rivers Trusts up and down the UK to work with local partners, other businesses, other charities, competitors and customers, so that we take a much more scientific approach to what needs to be done specifically in each river basin, because each is different. We have different rainfall patterns, different demands from households and businesses, and so really work to understand exactly what needs to be done, and then to start to invest in those projects.
Great, thanks, Sam. Emmeline, Sam touched on the supply chain there, and obviously in my presentation we talked about the potential for supply chain disruption associated with water, whether that's too much water or too little water. From a Heineken perspective, how are you sort of managing some of those water-related risks for key ingredients, and what measures are you taking to build that supply chain resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose just to echo what Sam said, ultimately without water, there is no beer. But fundamentally, it's a basic human right. So we've actually been working in this area, as you might expect, for decades. And actually since 2008, we've improved our efficiency by 36%. But to go back to your question on the supply chain, so you touched on it in the report, but ultimately 90% of our water footprint is in agriculture. And so our sustainable agriculture initiative, basically using the sustainable agriculture platform principles, takes a kind of watershed approach to how we look at mapping what is needed in a very hyper-local way. So as Sam said, we need to focus on our own operations, but ultimately looking at those the supply chain and making sure that we've got a water and agriculture approach that is kind of on a very hyper-local basis as well.
Great. Thanks, Emmeline. Eleanor, from WaterScan's experience working with businesses in the hospitality and food and drink sectors, where has their work on water sustainability largely been focused on up until this point, would you say? Has it tended to be sort of more their own direct water use within their operations rather than the water associated with their supply chains, or does it sort of vary depending on the business?
Yeah, it's a mixture really, and I think both are really important. So we work a lot with our customers on water strategy and building resilience. Like we've said before, water is incredibly local, so it's important to be very contextual about that. And I think probably quite an important point is that if you're asking your supply chain to do better on water, it's incredibly important to be a real leader and to lead by example as well. So you want to be having incredibly efficient leak identification and resolution processes, be trialling water efficient technologies, new behaviour change ideas. And there's lots of opportunities as well to collaborate with wholesalers to protect the network. So yeah, at the moment we sort of mainly focus on UK and direct operations, but there's an increasing interest and importance of sort of extending that to the supply chain as well.
If I could just add Julian, as well,
yes,
working with WaterScan. Sorry, we've been working with WaterScan since 2018, and when I spoke to our supply chain colleagues, they just talk about how amazing actually all the services around the WaterScan has really helped us in our own operations, but also within our pubs estate as well. Because obviously, what's unique about Heineken UK is we're home to the Great British Pub, so it's not just about what we do in our own operations; it's what we can do to help our pubs as well. And WaterScan really helps us in those efforts too.
Thanks, Emily.
Terrific. And Julian, I think a lot of this report, we took time in this report to sort of stress that the the urgency around water and the need to really, for businesses to start to get to grips with it. Now, obviously, the SRA works across a range of sustainability issues, and I wonder whether you feel that water is getting sufficient attention by businesses versus other burning issues like carbon or food waste, for example, and not acknowledging that these are connected issues in many ways.
Absolutely. So I think our initial feeling is no, water wasn't getting significant urgency behind it from a business perspective. And actually this year, water was the first issue that we opened our quarterly working groups that we do with large businesses across the UK, precisely because we thought that it's an underrepresented issue, and that it is not kind of elevated to the same urgency status. Now, out of that, we do see, echoing the kind of points made before, that operational efficiency is something that people are looking at and kind of increasingly getting better at. And that's not necessarily a surprise, because we see that similarly with food waste and with carbon, where it begins with scope 1, scope 2, looking at what is in your own operations. However, we know that the biggest impact of hospitality businesses is further afield and in their supply chain. And we're not yet raising enough urgency and enough direct conversation on how to address that.
And tell me a little bit about how at the SRA you're sort of working to build business engagement with water and get it on the agenda.
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, the first thing that we tend to do is invite businesses into the discussion and raise awareness of the issue, then breaking it down into those two spaces where what is it that you can do in your own operations and what is it that you can do further afield. So that's the initial conversation with businesses, and then echoing best practice in some of those examples. So I think already today and in your report, you mentioned some of the contract caterers like Sodexo and Compass that have taken action and are signatories on the RAP Water Roadmap. We've got some really good examples of ways in which CH&Co, which is business within Compass now, is doing some work within their supply chain, contributing to some of those collective action programs as well. So we like to champion good best practice to inspire others on how to take action.
Great, yes. And those collective action projects, it feels to me like a really nice sort of route into the water agenda for a lot of businesses, obviously benefiting from collaborating with other like-minded businesses, but also benefiting from the experience of those organisations facilitating those kind of projects as well. Sam, we touch on a few practical examples of CCEP's work within the report, in particular work to regenerate freshwater environments and build resilience through nature-based solutions. Always interesting for us to hear about those examples in a bit more detail. Do you want to perhaps pull out one or two that you're particularly proud of, examples of how you're supporting work in this area, and also give us a sense for how you decide where to target your support?
Yeah, sure. I'll approach it that way around, if that's all right, Nick, because it probably makes sense. I think there's been a huge amount of work done over the last few years, both ourselves as a bottler of the sort of Coca-Cola system and in partnership with the Coca-Cola company as well, to really, again, scientifically, we talk about science-based carbon targets, and we're increasingly getting into science-based water and nature targets, I think, as well, through things like TNFD, which is brilliant. But there's been a lot of work to more scientifically and systematically understand where the water risks are in the business. And so it's really nice that this water has been, this project has been largely owned by our central risk team, and they've worked with WaterScan in some instances as well. So I'll join Emily in a little shout out for WaterScan, an organisation called Resilience, and some very clever folks at the Cambridge University Judge Business School to build, and I will get out of my comfort zone very quickly when I talk about this, but to build a digital twin of our business, to understand what the business looks like now, what the business may look like in 10, 20, 30 years' time, and to try and to look at different climate scenarios from 1.5 to 4 degree of global heating, and to really try to understand much more scientifically where the risks are now and where we can project the risks might be in future, not just from our own manufacturing sites perspective, but from a supply chain perspective as well. And then we can, instead of having some kind of well-meaning catch-all target that's applied blanket across the business, but we can be much more surgical around where we invest and why we invest to protect the and to replenish water issues where we have them most. And so a really good example of that would be in South London. We've worked with the Rivers Trust for just over 10 years now in GB. And there's been a really nice example in what we call the Chambermeads wetland in South London, where it's a chalk stream. I think there's 85% or 80% of the world's 210 chalk streams are in the UK. So you talk about that, the kind of complicated Venn diagram of water, biodiversity and carbon. And this is a great example. So we've been working with the Rivers Trust for a number of years. They've been then going out and working with other local partners and the councils and things like that, helping to make those connections for and with us. And the idea has been when it comes down to a really granular level, just to do some really simple things. So it's to divert and put in some cleaners into one of these chalk streams to bring it so it connects with another. There's a confluence 200 meters further down the stream than it otherwise would have been, and to have a huge impact on the quality of the water, but also creating this wetland area that will lock up some carbon. It'll be very beneficial for a number of local wildlife species and will help to hopefully protect for future generations one of these very, very threatened and very, very rare chalk streams.
Great, thanks, Sam. Emily, similarly with Heineken, perhaps you can share some specific examples of initiatives you're supporting or specific investments you're making either within the supply chain or operationally at a site level to be responsible stewards of water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually just at one of our breweries yesterday and talking about a brilliant water efficiency investment at our Tadcaster brewery, where we've just introduced reverse osmosis plant to increase our water efficiency into the plus 90%. So there's a significant amount of investment happening in our own operations, but obviously we've talked about that kind of upstream and downstream focus to make sure that we're taking that full view. I suppose I've already kind of touched on it, but I mean, as part of our Brew a Better World global sustainability strategy, we have an ambition which focuses specifically towards healthy watersheds and nature. So there is a kind of global approach to our water stewardship. But we know in the UK, as I've mentioned, we're the home of the Great British Pub. So there's a significant amount that we can do to help our customers actually on their sustainability journeys. And so a key example of this would be Smart Dispense, which is our proprietary cellar management platform, which basically helps licensees save over 2,000 pints of beer, cider, water, and basically, continue to with consistency and pouring the perfect pint. So focusing on some of those downstream efforts for us, we know we can have a really huge material impact. But we've got some other great success stories within our supply chain as well. So for example, you touch on it in the report, Nick, but the apples that we press at our Ledbury mill, the pomace is used to for renewable electricity. It gets sent off to make biogas, and actually the mill is also it's a net contributor to water. It is from the process of pressing the apples, the juice is evaporated and produces its own water. So yeah, we've got lots of brilliant initiatives, but I'd say that kind of downstream focus for us and what we can do to help our customers is, and we've actually worked with the Sustainable Restaurant Association on a lot of the work we've been doing as well. So
can I jump in too and just add how essential that is? And I think it needs to be echoed, because restaurants are really busy environments where there's an intersection of a whole bunch of issues, and there's not a ton of margin in running a restaurant, and so it really requires that partnership upstream from the hospitality sector. And it's really wonderful to be in this conversation with the likes of Heineken and with the likes of Coca-Cola to talk about how you can build that connection, because restaurants in the hospitality sector, though at the front face of all of this, can't do it alone. They don't have the margin, they don't have the scale, they don't have the ability to do it there by themselves.
And that's it. All of the services that go around help free up our landlords to focus on what they love doing, which is pouring those pints, and lets us take that kind of efficiency and energy and water efficiency for them.
Please do, as I said at the start, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our panel, do submit them via the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get those answered. I don't believe we've had any in so far, so you can have the honour of being the first if you have a burning question to pose. Eleanor, I'm keen to talk a little bit about the strategic element. So let's say you've got a pub group comes to you and says, we've not really thought too much about water to date, but we want to embed it into our sustainability work. How does that conversation start, and what are the key elements of developing a successful water strategy, would you say?
Yeah, nice big question there. Thanks, Nick. I think probably where we would start is that a lot of organisations who haven't thought too much about water before don't necessarily know how much they use, where they're using it, where it might be wasted, and also what the financial costs are. And particularly with the current context we're in. So we're about to enter the next price or the next AMP cycle, it's called, which means that in the next 5 years, we're about to have price increases about to come in. So lots of businesses don't realise how much of an impact that their water use is having right now and in the coming years operationally. So by working out where the water is being used and where it might be wasted, we can start to develop really compelling business cases for introducing strategies, trialling water efficient technologies, and also making the most of opportunities that might be available. So when we're thinking about strategies, one thing that's really important that is obviously crucial to this report is all about risk and resilience and future-proofing your business. So already we have places like Essex and Suffolk and Cambridge where there are business growth restrictions. So businesses, particularly high-consuming businesses, have been told you can't have any more water from the main supply, or even you have to reduce your consumption. So with the view of these developments happening, which we're only expecting to spread further across the country, we have to make it really important that businesses are super proactive on what they're doing on water, so they're as efficient as possible, and also making the most of different opportunities that are coming up, whether it be water neutrality work by collaborating with councils like Horsham District Council, who's developing a new scheme there. Wholesalers are really keen to collaborate with businesses as well. And to coincide with the upcoming price increases, we're also about to have the water resource management plans renewed for the next 5 years. And this means that wholesalers will have new budgets and they'll have dedicated resource for non-household water efficiency. And they really want to work, particularly with high consuming businesses and in sectors like hospitality, where there's huge opportunities for water savings, to do more on this sorts of work. So when we've got this bigger context of water being potentially restricted for your operations and maybe even reducing expansion plans, and also being an opportunity to do better, to be a leader and to support your broader ESG corporate reporting and governance. There's a real myriad of ways that we can go about it that all stem from that initial data insights and understanding piece, which then enables you to take action.
Thanks, Eleanor. That piece on local restrictions as well, I think is really important, isn't it? Because this isn't, water. The risk around water, it's a risk to business growth and prosperity as well, actually, and that's something that perhaps isn't as well understood, certainly at the board level than perhaps it might be. We have had a question, come in from Anthony Spruce. It's for you, Emmeline. You mentioned RO, reverse osmosis systems. Are they not wasteful technology with a major percentage of the water going to waste? you able to address that one?
That's really well. I might have to defer you to one of our very experts in our supply chain. But ultimately, our Tadcaster brewery is quite unique in that it's a very old brewery and uses a borehole for its water rather than mains. So actually, it's required for that water to go through a filtration system to remove the sediment and minerals, so that it's able to go through the brewing process. So installing a reverse osmosis plant has meant that we can significantly reduce the amount of waste, because the multiple filtration system that the water goes through increases the efficiency of that water.
Great, thanks, Emmeline. And I think one of the things that came through in our research for this report was just how site dependent initiatives are, and there's certainly not a one size fits all approach to water efficiency. A lot of constraints in place imposed by specific sites and facilities and locations. So we need to be mindful of that. Another question for Eleanor, this time from Amy Fetzer from Footprint. Thanks, Amy. Clearly, there is a really powerful business case once businesses start to examine their water waste. How do you persuade HAFSA businesses to take this first step in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, because sometimes it can feel a little bit like a stab in the dark, but that's where I think the role of trials can be really significant. So, for example, one of our customers, Whitbread, has had a partnership that we've worked with South West Water, where they've been developing and rolling out water efficient technology like tap aerators at 40 sites. And this has actually led to a reduction in water consumption of around 15% per sleeper just from this set of trials. So actually already just from one technological approach, we're leading to very significant, measurable and sustained water reductions. So usually a great approach is to sort of prove the point, and then you're able to roll it out across your estate and maximise those savings throughout. And I think something that is really interesting is that water is one of those key areas where people are willing to collaborate and to share knowledge. So it's silly for all businesses to be running the same trials and finding the same results. But actually with things like water and sustainability, there are great opportunities to learn from each other, and then you can sort of build and innovate and get even better rather than starting from scratch again, which is really exciting.
Thanks, Eleanor. I'm really pleased you touched on collaboration there, because I'd like to explore that theme in a little bit more detail. Julian, do you think there is sufficient appetite among businesses for collaboration on water at a catchment level, given obviously we've been talking about water being a shared resource, or is there still a tendency for competitive instincts to kick in and businesses to want to work in isolation?
Genuinely, I think that Eleanor put it really well before, to say that sustainability is often a pre-competitive issue. I think that hospitality businesses are actually very good at recognizing that taking action on these things can impact the wider sector and ultimately have sector level benefits. I think one of the challenges on collaboration or collective action is just cost and the reality of hospitality, the position that hospitality businesses are in right now, and the cost pressures are coming from all angles. So I think Eleanor is exactly right to say that you raise the business case, you show where, efficiencies can make those savings to reinvest in other projects and water, and supply chain level engagement, because that's the stuff that tends to cost more, and you can save the money by doing the efficiency stuff first. So it is that needing to get your order of operations correct, but there's lots and lots of appetite in the sector for collaboration, and wanting to know kind of where to go and what to do.
And if I could just add as well, from a very global perspective, I know we with CCEP and the Coca-Cola Company, we're signatories of the UNGC's CEO water mandate, which is, obviously a global initiative and looking at the kind of water resilience coalition. So there's so much collaboration happening at a very global level as well. And obviously just to kind of mirror what we've talked about already, which is that kind of global and then hyper-local approach. I know in our, in the brewing industry, we work really closely with our trade association, the BBPA, and that kind of there's a sustainability cabinet where we all come together as brewers and pubcos to get to grips with what's happening in our industry and how we can apply best practices when it comes to sustainability. So yeah, I definitely feel like that hyper-local collaboration is happening too.
I think you recognise. I think there's a gentleman quoted in the report, Nick, called Alex Adam, who is brilliant and works for the Rivers Trust, and he's often at pains to point out to us the power of our brand in bringing other people together. So if the Rivers Trust go and try and open a few doors, Joe, I don't know, 3 in 10 will open, but if the Rivers Trust and Coca-Cola go in, then Joe, people's interest is maybe a little bit more piqued, or it helps to give a project a bit more gravity or magnetism to bring in Joe, retailers, other people based in the river basin. So I think as Heineken, as Coca-Cola, Joe, we can work with people like WaterScan, SRA, the Rivers Trust to lend them our name a little bit to help galvanise some of that collective action.
Yeah, definitely, Sam. I'm always talking about the power of our brand to do good. Brands for good, and that's what we're here to do. Fight the good fight.
And the other one of the other points that Alex from the Rivers Trust made, referring back to your point, Sam, was that often when businesses are prepared to invest in regeneration at catchment level, that will unlock match funding from other sources, from water companies potentially, from local authorities or other potential funders. So there's a real imperative and value, in businesses supporting these initiatives beyond, purely the businesses themselves. We're sort of heading towards the end now, but I would like to come back to that key takeaway slide and the need to ensure that water becomes a boardroom issue with risks and opportunities integrated into corporate governance and decision making. Is that happening, do we feel? I suspect among the businesses here today it probably is, because hence you're here talking about water. But Eleanor, perhaps can come to you. What's your sense for whether water has made it to the boardroom as a sort of critical issue for discussing and to have some kind of strategic planning around future risks?
Yeah, I think there's obviously more to go, but it's definitely becoming a real key boardroom issue. So you've got various ways of introducing that, whether it be, I think, disclosures, whether they be mandatory or voluntary, and corporate ESG reporting is a really interesting way that water can rise up the agenda, because it's a requirement and part of what's involved in something like a CDP disclosure. So as businesses become more savvy with both mandatory and voluntary disclosures and want to perform well and see that as an area of competitive advantage, that both requires them at board level to be having an overview of what's going on the water side of things, and also how it interrelates with all other aspects of their business. So particularly there are strong linkages with carbon, for example, whenever you have hot water as a factor. I think disclosure is probably a key driver, and also a real increase in understanding of water being a barrier and also an opportunity to growth. So at the moment, there's a new water commission that's being set up by the UK government. And one of the things that they're looking at is new tariffs and incentives to encourage water reuse. So potentially for manufacturing plants, for example, there are about to be new opportunities to use non-potable water for processes like cooling or cleaning, so that you can save the best quality water for the product itself, while also reducing mains consumption, which helps to protect the network, which will also reduce overall operational costs and improve efficiency. So there are lots of opportunities as well as threats when it comes to water. So I think that will help it become a sort of steady build-room issue.
Sam,
Can I build,
coming
sorry,
to
really
you.
quickly, Nick?
Yeah, of
Can I
course, brilliant.
build really fast and just say, I think all of those are extremely good points. I think the other thing that's helping elevate, bringing us back to the very beginning of the webinar, is the impact that water is having on, it's the most kind of tangible impact. And so when businesses are looking at the future, you know, Sam, you said ultimately you're selling water, it's an ingredient, but for hospitality businesses, the price of, you know, citrus spikes when an area is devastated by a flood or by drought. And so the way that we are hearing from businesses is that it is not elevated enough yet, but they all are working adamantly to raise that issue because of the risks that water poses within their supply chain and the way that that affects them somewhat existentially on whether or not they can continue to exist. So I do think we're going to see a real shift in behaviors. The other thing to note is that the more effective and efficient businesses are at managing their scope 1 and 2 emissions, you know, businesses are kind of doing the low-hanging fruit, and now we're starting to realize they have to grapple with the hard things. And so that's the scope 3 supply chain based initiatives, and that's where water, biodiversity, carbon, they're all interlinked, and businesses need to have strategies that show the interlinkages between those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a critical point to take away from this research is the connectedness. It's you know, you mustn't view these issues in isolation. It's all linked, and strategies need to recognize that. Sam, do you want to just touch on that element actually from a CCEP perspective? Just, you know, how you're sort of managing water in parallel and alongside other key sustainability issues.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I think it's tough, right? Because we there's this little phrase I've heard bandied around, which I wished I'd coined, but I can't claim any credit, which is that if climate change were a shark, then water would be the teeth. And I think that's what is rapidly accelerating this to be a more acute board level issue, is that as we globally fail in our attempts to keep under 1.5 degrees of global heating, then we're seeing water patterns change. And you listed some of the examples at the beginning, Nick. I think water's really complicated because water is, water issues, water topics is a bit of a catch-all. So is it a quality issue? Is it an availability issue? Is it a flooding issue? Is it drought? Is it acute now? Is it into the future? Is it seasonality? Is it, with regards to your operations and having disruption there? Is it, as we talked about in Valencia, around citrus and availability and spikes in price? So it's much more nuanced and much more local, and therefore I think it's kind of harder and more complicated for people to make quick decisions on. I'm obviously not suggesting that anyone's made any quick decisions on carbon and climate, but it is difficult to understand it first and then get into the decisions. And I suspect it's reasonably common amongst sustainability professionals that they spend the vast majority of their time working on carbon and climate. Certainly in my sector, and probably with Emmeline as well, a good amount of time working on things like packaging, and water is something that just doesn't receive quite as much attention. And if it's not getting that attention from a sustainability team, it's going to be difficult to get that much attention at board level. We're lucky within CCEP that we have got dedicated water experts in Francesco O'Hanlon, who's again referenced in the report. So we're lucky that we have that capacity and knowledge within our business. But I think that would be a challenge for smaller organisations if they're really wanting to accelerate on water, because it is very, very specialised.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. We have time for one more question, I think, from Roger Yordan. So thank you for that. Given as stated, 80% plus of product is water-based, for drinks manufacturers, obviously. Do producers have any plans to utilize new technologies to decentralize production, thus spreading the risk? Emmeline, Sam, who fancies having a crack at that one? Sam, I'll throw that one to you.
I'm happy to try and answer that. I mean, decentralizing production, if I understand the question correctly, and apologise if I get this wrong, the reason we have 5 large manufacturing sites in GB, and it used to be more, but it's now been consolidated, is for efficiencies that deliver other environmental benefits, largely around energy and carbon. So and there are obviously commercial imperatives to that enable us to keep prices affordable and keep shelves stocked. So I don't think that would have. I think you would negate one environmental benefit to maybe support another, possibly, if I understood the question correctly. One thing we are doing to try and protect that is you mentioned the ventures bit of our business, Nick, and the pipeline organics technology, which will hopefully allow us to generate energy from our effluent treatment plants in future, which would be incredible. We'll pilot that in Scotland next year. The other thing that we're looking at is a technology called Avalo, which is artificial intelligence. So how can we better understand through AI different strains of sugar that require less irrigation and require less water to deliver the same yields? So there's a hypothesis that you could drastically reduce the water needed in your supply chain to help deliver the same crops, and presumably that would work with other agricultural commodities as well. So it's maybe not quite decentralizing production, but is a kind of more radical, non-efficiency based solution that may help to deliver a step change in water consumption for food and drink.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, just on that point about de-risking as well, I think I get a sense that there's some moves afoot to sort of relocalize core ingredient production as well within the UK. We spoke with Charles Farram, the hop supplier, who are working very hard to develop new UK hop varieties that replicate that sort of taste and aroma of the New World hops that have become very popular over recent years, given the exposure of some of those countries, West Coast USA, for example, to prolonged periods of drought. You can't necessarily rely long into the future of having a ready supply of hops from the west coast of the USA. So looking to try and relocalize some of that production, because the UK hop industry has sort of been in decline for a long time now, and it feels like strategically for the drinks industry, it's vital we have some kind of domestic UK hop production here. So perhaps one to look out for over the years ahead. Look, we're out of time. So can I say a huge thank you to our panel for contributing to a fascinating discussion. Don't just take my word for it. We've had a comment on the Q&A saying, really great panel. Thank you for sharing your insights. So thank you for that comment. Whether you're viewing this at the start of your own business's journey on water sustainability, or whether you're already working through a water strategy, I hope you found plenty of nuggets of insight to take back to your business. The report itself will be dropping into inboxes later this afternoon, so I do hope you enjoy reading it, and thank you for joining us for the launch. Goodbye.